Welcome. I'm Dr. Lisa Toppin, and I thank you for joining me for this episode of Inputs to Action. I am excited and delighted to present to you Susan Brady. Susan, I've known for a long time. She has so many titles. I got to give you an essence of who this great woman is. She is the CEO of the Institute of Inclusive Leadership at Simmons University. She sits in the Deloitte Ellen Gabriel Endowed Chair as a part of Simmons University. She is a speaker. She is a writer. She is a coach. She is a best-selling author, which we're going to have some time to talk about as well, and just all around a great person. So I'm delighted to welcome you, Susan. Thank you for taking some time.
Lisa, it's so fun to be with you today. Thank you for having me.
I'm excited. And I've just have had the opportunity to experience you over the years. So this is special for sure. So I want to start with just as we were walking into this, we were having some conversation, and I learned some new things about you. I want to start with how you think about your expertise in this space, because I think we've all sort of thought of you and the way we've experienced you as solely anchored in women's leadership, women's development, but it's really broader than that. Share with us a little bit about how you how you have been leading over the years, and help us understand more about who you are.
So thank you for the question, and thank you for having me. It's such a generative question. It actually leads right to something I hope your listeners take away, and that is, I think we're on a constant, continuous cycle of maturing professionally and probably coming to new insights about our own thinking and our own value in the world. And so, truthfully, I've been a student and teacher of leadership for I started my leadership club at Martha's Vineyard Regional High School in, 1980 something. And because we didn't have one, right? So I've always been sort of interested about how leaders form, about what sets apart exceptional leaders from leaders who don't get traction, and been a student of human behavior. And so along the way, in my leadership journey and in teaching, coaching, advising, writing about leadership, for sure, an expertise emerged around women's leadership. And it was more about what I couldn't deny was true. I believed in meritocracy until I had to face the reality that I was sold a bill of goods. Like, right. The truth is, I was working just as hard, and I was crossing my T's and dotting my I's and realizing some people had sort of ability to get ahead more than me. And it never occurred to me that it was because of my identity. And when I started to look more at this, I couldn't really put it down. And so birthed the Women in Leadership Institute at a former employer. That was in the late 90s. It's still thriving today, and a global practice on women's leadership. And I find myself today really interested in, for sure, creating equity in leadership in organizational life, Lisa. But I'd say I'm kind of going back to my roots about what I find to be most essential in inclusion, in developing inclusive mindsets, creating equity, gender equity, and also effective leadership is relational leadership, which is it's emotional intelligence, it's self-leadership, it's understanding self so you can lead more effectively with others. It's all that social construct part of leadership that I think has been called the soft stuff, but it's actually the hard stuff, It
is. Yeah. Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm stepping on your last sentence there. So it is absolutely the hard stuff. And I just love the fact that you're sort of calling out that this relational leadership, the way in which we interact, because that really includes everybody. That's not limited to women. That's every human, right?
Right, for sure. I mean, I go so far as to say the 7 practices in my latest book that I co-authored with Dr. Lynn Perry-Wooten, who's the president of Simmons University, and Janet Foudy, who's the executive chair of the board of Deloitte. The 7 practices in Arrive and Thrive are for everyone.
Yeah.
we offer some context that make these practices particularly important for women
Yep.
at work.
Yep.
And, things like cultivating courage and embracing your authenticity and, leading a healthy team, the subcomponent parts of this, they're for everyone.
Right.
It's just can be trickier for women. And so it was during the writing of this last book in the past year that I got back to sort of my core interest in how humans treat humans.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's like the foundation of, well, it's your work, right? It's the foundation of how we create cultures of inclusion.
Right, right. And I appreciate what you're saying too, or your earlier comment too about the meritocracy and how that doesn't really always exist, and how we know that women and minorities will take it on the chin, believing that it does. And so then when it doesn't happen for you, you're making that as an interpretation about you, when there's some other things at play that potentially are impacting whether or not you're getting the advance, right?
Right, right. Yeah, so be careful what you conclude. I think the most important thing I've learned about gender, about advancing women in particular, I think it's true for any underrepresented population, is without sponsorship, it's really hard to get out ahead. It's really hard to be promoted. I think about, and you're the same. Like, think about every step of my career. It was a a recipe of hard work,
Right.
listening hard smarts,
Mm-hmm.
putting effort in, and somebody in a position of power seeing me as someone who's creating value, who's willing to put their neck on the line to help me get out in front. When if I didn't have the latter, I could have done the former for my whole career,
Exactly.
never had another promotion, right?
Yeah, right. And so many do. So, and we 100%, we know that happens far too often. So it's how do we start to figure out how we level that field of the few powerful people extending their power and seat and support to more folks across the floor, if you will. So that's good. So, but I want to go into the book a bit. So you've written a lot of books,
Yeah.
but this book is particularly I think powerful, and I want to know Arrive and Thrive. You see it there over your shoulder.
Yep.
I want to know what inspired you, what made you decide this was the time to take on this kind of book, and you got so many heavy hitters in there. So I love the way you've approached it. But what
Yeah.
got you going?
What got us going? Look, I think my last book, which I wrote, Mastering Your Inner Critic, was really for, I think, women who hadn't felt like they'd arrived yet. Like, we're kind of working on getting to where it is that we aspire. Arrive and Thrive is actually not just for arriving. It's for those of us who might have arrived at a station or a position or a role in our lives that we aspired to, and we might not be accused of thriving. And so as Janet and Lynn and I looked around, we thought, gosh, have we really created support systems and practices and knowledge and experience for women to really have exceptional experiences when they do find themselves in leadership positions? And we just felt like there wasn't enough,
Mhm.
and so it's really a distillation of the best thinking out there. And we interviewed 25-ish sitting C-level executives, most of them women, not all, we were inclusive, about these 7 practices, because from our experience, these are what matters most. The absence of them can derail a career. And especially when you finally get into a role, how can I be successful in it? And so I think, my joke has been, Lisa, is to people in positions of authority and power, the higher up in organizational life you get, the more power you have, the less people tell you the truth, and the harder people laugh at your jokes, and the more lonely you feel.
100%.
Potentially, right? The more lonely, especially if you're in a C-level like we are, right? So there's just conversations that are inappropriate to have with even peers where we would once do that, right? And so it's not so much peers, but maybe certainly direct reports, right? So, so
Mm-hmm.
how do I continue to grow, feel supported, thrive
Yeah, yeah,
in leadership? Yeah,
yeah.
that's what the need was that called to us.
Well, it's a big need, and I don't know that until now that that's really been answered, because I do think that that is the place in which leaders struggle all the time. You crest to a certain level, and all of a sudden there are things you can't say, there are things you can't do, there are conversations. So it immediately sets up some boundaries that
Yep.
thwart some authenticity, that thwart deep or personal or real relationship. And as you said, people stop telling you the truth. They laugh at your jokes. It's the emperor has no clothes, and they're gonna let you walk down the avenue and and not tell you. And so, what do you advise for women who are arriving and finding a way to thrive, dealing with that kind of, I'm going to call it, tension? How do you do it? How do you hurdle that?
So, so first of all, I mean, I think that we really need to focus on all 7 practices. But
Mm.
the first practice, I think, is the only practice in the book that without it, the other 6 don't work as well.
Mm.
And the first practice is really the answer to my question, which is your question, which is investing in and returning to your best self.
Mm.
And like I said before, because we're evolving and maturing and growing over time, jobs that never would have appealed to us, 5, 10 years ago look really actually quite exciting to us today, or things that we're doing that really got us, joy for a long time no longer interest us, right? We evolve, we change. And so best self is, our strengths and talents, both born and earned and experienced over our lifetime. So
Mhm.
character traits, but also lived talents, combined with where we're called to add value to others, combined with where we experience joy and vitality. And when these things come together, we're in our best self flow or our best self zone.
Mhm.
And I think, as in my experience, and this is found in the research, is we women will often forget ourselves in our own leadership journey. Like, we have to
Mhm.
bring ourselves along on our own leadership journey.
Mhm.
And a return to ourself is super important on a moment to moment basis sometimes, right? Because we want to be our best self, our
Right.
compassionate, centered, integrated best self. And it's hard.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
hard.
it is hard. We're all fighting for it all the time. And I think, as you know, we've shared, we've talked, as moms, as of teenagers now, and young adults. We're really fighting for always that integration. How do I integrate my full self as a mom, as a completely attentive, engaged mother, and potentially partner, but how do I do that when I've got a fully engaged work life as well? And those are some of the challenges that show up, that often, not always, but often, our male counterparts don't fight in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I would go so far as to say the Great Resignation, coming out of the pandemic, has been as much a she session as anything, right?
Right.
And I think a lot of women couldn't afford to stand back and think, what do I want to do? It was just very clear, very quickly, what they could afford or not afford to do.
Right.
And a lot of us, especially knowledge workers, I think are and I think this is all genders. I see a sea tide change
Mm.
in how human beings are confronting their professional lives.
Mhm.
And we talked about balance. This, like, oh my gosh, work-life balance was like the top theme for every conference for the last 30 years. And I'm not sure we achieved in helping people create balance. A pandemic sure does help. And I don't know if I would call it balance for me, but I know I'm much more conscious of where I spend my time
Yeah.
and how I give of my energy.
Yeah.
And
Well, I think the pandemic certainly helped us see the need to focus in on this, because coming through the pandemic, women actually picked up a huge tax in terms of facilitating the family now at home for a time period, as well as trying to work. And it didn't matter in many instances what level, that the tax was significant in the same.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm finding just an overall like a lower tolerance level
Yes.
for human beings in roles that are leadership or management roles who aren't able to connect with other human beings. Like in the context of now I'm more stressed, or I've got responsibilities I didn't have 2 years ago, or I've had an awareness about what I really want in my life, right? Those kinds of things create interpersonal complications, right? And being a really skillful leader requires us to see the humans, not just the resources.
Yeah.
And some are just better at it than others, but it's learned. We can teach it. We can teach it.
So no, I'm coming back in the book a little bit, because you gave us a preview on the first hurdle that we really have to have, or the other six don't work. But maybe, I don't know, you want to give us a little bit of a snapshot of what else is in store if we
Right.
dive
So I
in?
mean, so investing in your best self really identifies what are your strengths and talents, and how often are you spending time doing things that really light you up, and also what keeps you out of your best self. So if your best self isn't so much what you're doing every day, but how you're showing up every day, are there things that are enabling your best self, or are there barriers to your best self? And what is it that you have in the locus of control that you can change for yourself? Our second practice is about cultivating courage and embracing authenticity. And then we've got, inspiring a bold vision, fostering resilience. I'm mixing them up. Committing to the work of the inclusive leader is the last one, the teams one. So what we're covering as the journey of the practices go through the book is really starting from an orientation of self inside ourselves, and then tackling things like what's appropriate in my role for being authentic, being genuine. How much is it okay or safe for me to show and not show? Our research at Simmons on authenticity was really clear that leaders want authentic connection at work, and people want to work for authentic leaders. And what that really means is they're honest, they're transparent. There was a correlation between authenticity and confidence. So people who have an air of confidence are perceived to be more authentic, which I thought was really awesome.
That is interesting.
Especially for women. Like, don't hold back your sense of self-confidence, women. So I think the conversation around authenticity is an important one. The courage conversation, Lisa, I learned a lot diving into the concept of courage, because it's not about not experiencing fear. So there's, anytime we take a risk, there's going to be a feeling of, oh, I haven't done this before. Instead, cultivating courage is about building that muscle of noticing vulnerability and then thinking like, oh, this is just vulnerability, right? Most of the people I've asked, have you ever really fallen on your face when you've taken a risk professionally? Like really embarrassing high low. Most people actually haven't. And if they have, they talk about the rebound. That's when resilience comes in, right? So fostering resilience is about learning and sharing setbacks, because we don't when we have a setback in life, we don't come back to the place we were. We're catapulted ahead in all sorts of ways that sometimes we can and can't see after a major setback, like a job change that maybe wasn't our choice, or maybe was. It's often very difficult, or a relationship change in our life, or even a geographic move or a job move. I mean, these are big, resilient, or a death in the family. Like, these are big moments for resilience. And so taking on a learner mindset around them matters. Go from the inside out to how do we now then engage and lead others in a way that feels inclusive, inspiring, engaging.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah, that was That was a good moment for Lisa Toppin right there, what you just gave me in terms of the idea that when you have when you go through something significant, you don't return to the same place. You're fundamentally changed.
Fundamentally.
And you fundamentally changed. And so the opportunity then is, what did you actually learn through all of that? And then so for many of us, the miss is not taking all of the lessons. Like we
Okay.
go through something.
Yep.
Go.
So, well, what I was going to say, two things came to mind. So one of the, I believe, most underutilized skills in leadership training and in life is what my co-author Lynn calls reflective sense making. But it is the practice of reflection. So if you had a recent setback, just the question, what is clear to me about me? What's clear to me about this? I mean, giving yourself, honoring yourself and reflecting on it, super, super important. The other thing I was going to say is we've got a tool in the book that I would encourage listeners to use if they have had a recent setback professionally or personally, in the chapter on authenticity. It's a values tool. There's lots of values tool out there. It just happens to be the Arrive and Thrive values tool. And it puts you through a 4-step process of reevaluating your own values, because when we also have a setback, chances are our rebound has rejiggered some things for us about what's most important, because our values change over the course of our lifetime, which surprised me. I was surprised by that. I thought, values were a fixed state, like I value X. And I think if you and I were to take a values quiz at age 20 and take it again now, we're in and around the same orbit.
Right.
But the order of them matters. And the top 3 to 5 matter most when we think about not leaving ourselves behind on our own journey, right? And showing up authentically,
Right. Oh, that's so good. That's so good. There's so much goodness in this book. Like you said you talked to 25, and I wasn't counting as I went through, but you have a lot of significant leaders quoted and sharing their thoughts throughout the text. I'm wondering, why did you think it important to sort of get these sort of, I'm going to say, known important leaders as a part of this?
Yeah. I love the question. We ended up, for your listeners who haven't read the book, we ended up capturing the interviews in several different ways, some in quotes within the chapters, others with micro stories within the chapters. And then we have Thriver's wisdom in each chapter at the end of the chapter. And so, if one of the sitting C-levels said, what really impacted me most was how I managed through a resilient time, we captured that in the chapter on resilience as a thriver. Look, I think I'm very heavily biased to learning from other people's experience. And part of my bias about that is a personal experience in writing my first book, which I was advised when I felt all sorts of imposter, not just who am I to do this, but I have no idea. Like I have no idea what I'm doing. And it was borrow confidence from somebody, from others, borrow confidence, ask for help from people who've done it before. Right. And both take a fair amount of vulnerability. And I'm really proud of that first book as a result, because other people's wisdom made it so much better. And when writing a book, my editor, Danya Dickerson at McGraw-Hill, this is my first book, she said to me once, because I tend to be self-reflective and I'll offer my own journey and my own experience. She's like, Susan, she said, you got to understand readers. When somebody picks up a book, they want something for themselves. So a reader is actually selfish in a good way. All of us are. When you think about when you shop for things to consume, you're looking for some knowledge about something. So what I learned about that is giving myself permission to go from what works for me is to here's a recommendation, and bringing in lots of different and diverse voices. Here's what worked for me and here's what I would suggest you do. Helps the reader sort of pick and choose what lands for them most.
Right.
So
Right.
that's why we want to include other voices, include stories. Life happens in stories,
Yeah.
makes
Yeah.
it accessible. It makes a theory or a research conclusion or a concept come to applicable life when we hear someone's story about it.
Yeah, no, that's so good. I love I think that's so true. We need, if you're going to reach a broad audience, which you have as a best-selling author now with this particular book, you need different people need different things.
Yeah.
We were talking just before we started about our two children, and I can't claim the ownership of this, but somebody said to me long ago, if you have two children, you're already managing diversity. So,
Oh yeah.
right. And so the idea that you're writing a book that's going to appeal to so many different readers, and I love what editor said, that are looking for something for themselves. You've given a wide range of pieces to go get, and so
Right.
I love that. It's awesome. I want to, before we wrap, you are hosting some amazing conferences at Simmons, and so we should talk a little bit about that. I know this past year you had some standout names like Simone Biles.
Yeah.
Tell us about the conferences. How do
I
we?
know this past year, Amanda Gorman wrote this gorgeous poem for us
Oh.
on courage and connection. And we had Simone Biles, who is Courage Defined. So this year we haven't unveiled our speaker lineup quite yet, but March 14th, 2023 is the 44th Simmons Leadership Conference, and we will be hybrid. So for those folks who don't know, the Simmons Leadership Conference was, I think, the first, we believe it to be the first public, open, as opposed to invitation only, business conference designed for women leaders in the world. And we haven't missed a year. And we're very proud of that because we've been through, a few global, lots of things. So we went fully online with less than 6 weeks notice during the pandemic in 2020. And we continued virtual. And now we're back to we're experimenting with hybrid, which I think, the future of work is hybrid, right? Yeah. So the future of learning is hybrid. The future of development is hybrid. The future of leadership is hybrid. It sort of really creates a new world order for leaders. And so we're experimenting ourselves. So there's more online at inclusiveleadership.com about the Simmons Leadership Conference. But we have had, I think close to 120,000 people attend our events over the last 44 years. And we're expecting close to 10,000 people in March. We're much less in person because we're going to keep that somewhat intimate. And then we have a whole interactive online experience. So I love these shots in the arm of leadership inspiration. Especially for underrepresented populations, because it's a way to just click in, connect, and see people who look like us, who have maybe defied the odds and made it, who have dared greatly and made it, who had all sorts of courage, who had a setback they're willing to talk about publicly and learn from it and come back from it and then, become a star. So it's inspiring.
Yeah, no, I'll say, in our lives, we probably would acknowledge that anytime women gather, we usually come away feeding our souls, getting something that we need. It's called Girls Trip, Girls Weekend, Girls Night. And so you get a whole conference with great speakers and inspirational moments. It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
I know at Simmons, we also, through the Institute, we also do a fair amount of work with organizations, and we'll do a customized session on one of the practices or many for Arrive and Thrive. We also have our certificate programs, strategic leadership for women and such. I notice, Lisa, when I do this work as an expert, as a facilitator, as a consultant, sometimes I don't know about you, sometimes I almost feel guilty how much it gives me too, right? How much oxygen I get from offering some of this thinking to to women in particular. Although I'm on a crusade to bring in the men. We got to, if we're going to see gender parity in our lifetime, we got half the world's population to sort of welcome on board to all this.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And we recently, in one of our teams here, just hosted you and your team doing a session focused on women, but they also focused on men as well,
Yeah.
doing an ally program, which I thought was breakout and great.
Well, this is what I thought was so enlightening for Illumina and for you. And I know it's not all leaders of DEI or talent and leadership think this way. I am becoming pretty clear. I don't think it's smart for an organization to do programming for underrepresented populations, any subset, if we're not reaching out to everyone to learn leadership skills. Call it allyship, call it being a champion, call it sponsorship. We need to rethink how we lead in order to create a future that it looks and is more diverse and inclusive. And so that's an incumbent upon everyone. So I have a lot of time for organizations who want to think about everyone while they acknowledge some are being left behind in ways that they don't want to foster anymore.
Right. And that for sure, we've got to acknowledge there's a gap to close, and then there's education to offer that really allow us to come together in the way that we love to. So,
and we're all learning, aren't we, Lisa?
Like, we're all learning. That's what I say all the time. This is a practice. Inclusion behavior is leadership behavior. It's a practice like you would practice yoga. And so you've got to keep your eyes on your mat. Don't cheat. Try to do what the person next to you is doing, because you're going to hurt yourself. Just focus on what you got to do and continue to build. So we're all learning all the time. This has been delightful. Thank you so much for taking time with me and sharing. I want to know, and I want the audience to know, best place to, they've got to find Arrive and Thrive. And I know they can get it at Amazon, because I did. But what else, how else should they connect with you? Social media?
Oh, yeah. So I'm on LinkedIn. Probably the best thing is arriveandthrive.com has all my handles. And then inclusiveleadership.com has, anything that's not on arriveandthrive.com. So link in with me. I'm trying my hand at Instagram,